When I arrived at my own brother's lavish engagement party, security physically grabbed my arms and dragged me toward the service entrance. The guards told me the groom himself had given strict orders that I was not to be seen by the high society guests. Through the glass doors, I watched my parents look right at me and then turn away like I was a total stranger. But exactly 1 hour later, my mother called me in absolute hysterics, screaming that the hotel owner had just shut the entire party down and confiscated everything. What she did not know was that the owner she was screaming about was me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own peace. My name is Natalie. I am 34 years old and I spent my entire life playing the dutiful financial safety net for a family that viewed me as nothing more than a background prop. As a self-made woman in the luxury hospitality industry, I am used to navigating high-stress situations, but nothing truly prepares you for the deep visceral sting of being discarded by your own flesh and blood. It was a crisp Saturday evening when I pulled up to the Grand Atrium Hotel. The valet took the keys to my car, and I smoothed down the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit. I had deliberately chosen an understated minimalist outfit. I knew my future sister-in-law Jasmine was an image-obsessed lifestyle influencer, and the last thing I wanted was to trigger her insecurities by wearing anything too flashy. I just wanted to show up, hand over my congratulatory gift, and fulfill my obligatory role as the supportive older sister to my 30-year-old brother Brandon. Stepping into the main lobby was like walking into a modern palace. The Grand Atrium was famous for its opulence, and tonight it had been transformed into a spectacle of absurd proportions. Towering floral arrangements of white orchids and imported roses flanked the grand staircase. The soft, elegant notes of a live string quartet drifted through the air perfectly, complementing the gentle clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Through the slightly parted mahogany double doors of the main ballroom, I could see a massive custom ice sculpture gleaming under the chandeliers. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved gracefully through a crowd of people dressed in shimmering evening gowns and expensive tuxedos. It was a breathtaking display of wealth. A display I knew for an absolute fact my brother could not afford. Brandon was a guy who masqueraded as a wealthy venture capitalist, but his actual reality was a mountain of debt and failed business ideas. Yet there he was, standing at the center of the room, playing the role of the billionaire playboy. I took a deep breath, clutching my small silver purse, and walked toward the ballroom entrance. I prepared my face for the fake smiles and exhausting small talk, but just as my hand reached out to grasp the heavy brass handle of the door, a massive hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. I gasped and turned around. Two towering security guards in matching black suits and earpieces were standing directly in my path. The taller one tightened his grip on my jacket, his expression completely blank. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low so as not to draw attention. "I think there is a misunderstanding. I am the groom's sister. I am just trying to go inside." The second guard pulled a laminated piece of paper from his inside pocket. It was a printed photograph of me taken from my social media profile. A thick red line had been drawn diagonally across my face with a permanent marker. "There is no misunderstanding, ma'am," the taller guard said, his voice a low, intimidating rumble. "The groom provided this photo personally. He gave explicit instructions that you are absolutely not permitted to enter the main guest area or mingle with the VIP attendees." I stared at the photograph, my mind struggling to process the sheer cruelty of it. Brandon had actually printed out a picture of me and handed it to security, like I was some sort of known criminal or a dangerous stalker. "Please let go of my arm," I said, my voice trembling slightly, with a mixture of shock and rising anger. "I am on the guest list. Our parents are right inside." I looked past the guards, peering through the gap in the mahogany doors. My mother Susan and my father Richard were standing just 20 feet away, near the caviar station. My mother made direct eye contact with me. I felt a brief surge of hope, expecting her to rush over and clear up this horrible mistake. Instead, her eyes darted to the security guards, her lips pressed into a thin line, and she deliberately turned her back to me, taking a calm sip of her champagne. My father did the exact same thing. Before I could even process that secondary betrayal, the guards began to move. "You need to come with us right now," the first guard commanded. They did not give me a choice. One guard gripped my left arm, the other positioned himself right behind me, and they physically marched me away from the ballroom entrance. My face burned with severe humiliation as several well-dressed guests stopped to stare, whispering behind their hands as I was paraded through the lobby like a trespasser. They did not lead me to the front exit. Instead, they forced me down a narrow side corridor and pushed open a heavy metal door marked strictly for staff only. The transition was jarring. 1 second, I was surrounded by the soft glow of crystal chandeliers and the scent of expensive perfume. The next, I was thrust into the harsh, buzzing glare of fluorescent lights. The plush carpeting was instantly replaced by cold-stained concrete. The air here smelled of industrial bleach-damp mops and the faint odor of the dumpsters from the loading dock just outside. The beautiful music was completely drowned out by the chaotic shouting of the kitchen staff and the loud clattering of heavy metal pans. The guards let go of me only when we were standing deep inside the service corridor, surrounded by towering stacks of dirty banquet chairs and rolling carts of unwashed dishes. "You wait here," the guard instructed coldly. "The groom said he will come deal with you when he has a free moment. Do not attempt to go back out to the lobby, or we will have you arrested for trespassing." The heavy metal door slammed shut behind them, leaving me standing alone in the freezing, brightly lit hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked down at my expensive shoes standing on a floor sticky with spilled soda and grease. The sheer disrespect of it all washed over me like a bucket of ice water. For 34 years I had compromised. I had swallowed my pride. I had paid their bills when they fell behind, and I had endured the constant quiet messaging that I was simply not good enough to fit their picture-perfect family image. I was just the reliable workhorse, the one they called when they needed money, but the one they hid away when the cameras came out. I stood there in the cold corridor, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and music vibrating through the walls from the party I was banned from attending. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. The sadness that had initially gripped my chest was rapidly burning away, replaced by a cold, sharp, and intensely focused fury. I was not going to cry. I was not going to beg for their attention anymore. The time for being the understanding, compliant daughter was officially over. Just as I made the decision to turn around and leave the loading dock, the heavy metal door swung open again. The brief burst of classical music and polite applause was immediately cut off as the door slammed shut. Brandon stood there adjusting the cuffs of a custom-tailored tuxedo that I knew for a fact cost more than his car. Beside him was Jasmine. She was draped in a shimmering emerald green gown that swept the dirty concrete floor, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Her phone was clutched in her other hand, the ring light case glowing brightly in the dim corridor. I expected a frantic apology. I expected Brandon to say the security guards had made a terrible mistake and demand they release me immediately. But the irritated scowl on his face told me everything I needed to know. He was not here to rescue me. He was annoyed that I was causing a delay in his perfect evening. Jasmine took one step forward, her eyes scanning me from the top of my neatly pinned hair down to my sensible leather pumps. Her upper lip curled in a display of pure, unadulterated disgust. She did not even bother saying hello or feigning politeness. "Look at you," Jasmine sneered, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. "I told Brandon this would happen. You showed up to the social event of the season looking like you were about to audit a tax return." I looked down at my designer suit. It was understated, yes, but it was elegant and highly appropriate. It was certainly not cheap, but it did not scream for attention, and in Jasmine's world, attention was the only currency that mattered. "You have this incredibly bland corporate drone vibe," Jasmine continued, waving her manicured hand at me dismissively. "Do you have any idea how much work went into tonight? We have 2 major bridal magazines covering this engagement." I have over 300,000 followers expecting flawless high society content. We have investors and brand sponsors in that room. Your entire aesthetic is a complete disaster. If you are seen mingling in the background of my photos, it ruins the carefully curated old money aesthetic I have spent months building. I stared at her genuinely, trying to process the sheer audacity of her words. She was standing in a luxury hotel she did not pay for, drinking expensive champagne she could not afford, and lecturing me about an aesthetic she had completely fabricated. Jasmine did not come from old money, neither did Brandon. They were playing dress-up, putting on a theatrical performance for strangers on the internet. I looked at Brandon, waiting for the older brother I grew up with to step in and defend me. We had shared a home for 18 years. I had helped him write his college applications. I had covered his rent when he lost his first job out of school. I had bailed him out of massive credit card debt twice before he turned 25. Surely he would draw the line at his fiancée treating me like a disease. Brandon did not defend me. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples like I was a massive burden he was being forced to deal with. He stepped up beside Jasmine and placed a reassuring hand on her waist, pulling her close. Jasmine is right, Natalie, he said, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. This night is the most important networking event of my life. I am pitching my new venture capital firm to some very heavy hitters tonight. We need everything to look absolutely flawless. You just do not fit the demographic we are trying to project. You always look so tired and serious. It brings the whole mood down. My jaw tightened. I looked tired because I worked 80-hour weeks building a real hospitality business from the ground up while he sat in expensive coffee shops drafting fake pitch decks for companies that did not exist. If I do not fit your demographic, I asked, my voice dangerously calm, then why did you even bother sending me a formal invitation? Why not just leave me off the list entirely? Brandon shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable for the first time, but his overwhelming arrogance quickly overpowered his guilt. Well, we needed someone reliable for the post-party logistics, he explained casually, as if this was a perfectly normal thing to say to a sibling. You were never actually supposed to mingle with the guests. We only put you on the master list, so hotel security would let you in the building at the end of the night. Jasmine has a ton of incredibly expensive registry gifts currently sitting in the bridal suite. We need you to help the hotel staff pack them all up and load them into your SUV. You are basically here to transport the gifts to our apartment so we do not have to pay a premium courier service. The air left my lungs. The reality of the situation crashed over me. He had not invited his sister to celebrate his engagement. He had summoned free-moving labor. He wanted me to wait in the wings while he partied and then haul his presents like a hired hand. Before I could even formulate a response to that staggering level of disrespect, Brandon reached into his tuxedo pocket. He pulled out a single crumpled $50 bill. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it lightly through the air. The green paper hit my chest and fluttered down to the sticky concrete floor, landing right beside the toe of my shoe. Here, Brandon said, checking his heavy gold watch. Go across the street and buy yourself a burger or something. Wait in your car. I will text you around midnight when the VIP guests have cleared out and the heavy lifting needs to be done. Just make sure you pull your car around to the loading dock so nobody sees you hauling the boxes through the main lobby. Jasmine let out a soft, mocking laugh. She raised her phone to check her reflection in the camera again, adjusting a stray curl near her ear. Hurry up, babe, she told Brandon. We have that sponsored champagne toast to film in 5 minutes, and the photographer wants us posing by the custom ice sculpture before it starts melting. Brandon nodded eagerly. Without another word, without even a backward glance to see if I had picked up the money, they turned their backs on me. They pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped back into the glittering, deafening fantasy world they had built on a foundation of absolute lies. The door clicked shut, sealing me out once again. I stood alone in the absolute silence of the corridor. I looked down at the crumpled $50 bill resting on the dirty floor. I did not pick it up. I slowly lifted my head, staring at the thick metal door that separated me from my brother and his fake empire. My vision narrowed. The lingering sorrow in my chest was completely eradicated, replaced by a calculating, icy resolve. They wanted a flawless, expensive party. They wanted to play billionaire and treat me like the hired help. They were about to find out exactly how much their little fantasy cost, and they were going to pay the bill in full. I bent down to pick up the crumpled $50 bill, not to use it, but as a physical reminder of exactly what my presence was worth to them. But before I could even straighten up, the heavy metal door swung open violently one more time. The brief wave of classical music and polite chatter was immediately silenced as the door slammed shut. My mother Susan and my father Richard stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light of the service corridor. My mother was holding her expensive silk shawl tightly around her shoulders, looking flustered and out of breath. For a brief, naive second, my heart jumped. I thought they had noticed my forced removal. I thought they had come out here to demand an explanation from security and bring me back inside where I belonged. "There you are, Brandon," my mother said, stepping right past me, as if I were entirely invisible. "The photographer is ready for the generational family portraits near the ice sculpture. We need to hurry before the lighting changes." She turned her head, and her eyes finally landed on me, standing next to a rolling cart of unwashed banquet dishes. Her expression instantly shifted from radiant joy to intense, exhausting irritation. She let out a sharp sigh. "Natalie, what on earth are you doing back here, making a scene?" my mother hissed, stepping forward to furiously adjust the lapel of Brandon's tuxedo. "People are starting to ask questions about where everyone went. You are ruining the flow of the evening." I looked at her, my own mother praying for a single ounce of maternal instinct to kick in. "I am not making a scene, Mom," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady. Brandon literally had hotel security physically drag me out of the lobby. He just handed me $50 and told me to go buy a burger and wait in my car until it was time for me to carry Jasmine's gifts. I looked over at my father, expecting shock. I expected him to turn red to yell at Brandon for treating his own sister like a hired pack mule. Instead, my father crossed his arms over his chest and let out a heavy, disappointed sigh, directed entirely at me. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Natalie, stop being so difficult!" My father barked, his voice echoing loudly off the cold concrete walls. "You know exactly how important tonight is for your brother. You need to compromise and be a team player for once in your life. Just like you did when we redirected your college fund to get his first tech startup off the ground. He needed a head start then, and he needs you to step aside now." The sheer casualness with which my father threw that memory in my face made all the air leave my lungs. He brought it up like it was a minor favor I had cheerfully agreed to. A decade ago, they had emptied the savings account I had spent my entire adolescence contributing to from my part-time jobs, handing every single penny to Brandon for a company that went bankrupt in less than 6 months. I had been forced to take out massive, crippling student loans and work 3 different jobs just to pay for my own education. And here was my father weaponizing the theft of my future as proof that I should continue to let them walk all over me. "Your father is absolutely right," my mother added, not even bothering to look at me as she smoothed down a microscopic wrinkle on Brandon's shoulder. "Jasmine's high society friends are essential for Brandon's new public image. They are the kind of people who invest millions in venture capital. You showing up looking like a tired corporate accountant simply does not fit the brand they are trying to sell tonight. Just go wait in your car like your brother asked. We will have the kitchen staff bring you a plate of food later if there is anything left over." I looked at the 3 of them standing together under the harsh lights. My brother was actively smirking behind my mother's back, victorious and completely unbothered. My mother was prioritizing an influencer's fake internet aesthetic over the basic dignity of her own daughter. My father was demanding I sacrifice myself to subsidize his golden child's absolute delusions of grandeur. They were all in on it. They had always been in on it. For the first time in my entire life, I did not feel that desperate clawing urge to earn their love. I did not feel the need to explain myself, to cry, or to prove that I was worthy of standing in that ballroom. The invisible strings of guilt and obligation they had used to control me for 34 years suddenly snapped one by one. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest since childhood completely evaporated. I felt incredibly light. I felt dangerous. I did not argue with them. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the crumpled $50 bill I was still holding in my hand. I slowly and carefully smoothed out the creases against my thumb, folded it neatly in half, and slid it into the pocket of my designer jacket. I looked up and met my mother's gaze, then my father's, and finally Brandon's. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of submission. It was the kind of smile that made my mother actually take a half step backward, her brow furrowing in sudden unspoken confusion. "Enjoy your evening," I said softly. I turned on my heel and began walking away down the long, dim service corridor. The sharp rhythmic click of my leather pumps echoed against the concrete walls, sounding less like a retreat and more like the ticking of a very loud clock. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, probably relieved that they had finally gotten rid of their biggest embarrassment. I reached the heavy double doors at the end of the hall that led out toward the rear parking garage. I pushed them open and stepped through, letting them slam shut behind me, completely cutting off my family from my line of sight. But I did not walk out to the parking lot. I did not get into my car to go buy a burger. I did not leave the building at all. As soon as the heavy metal doors shut behind me, I bypassed the exit leading out to the concrete parking garage. Instead, I took a sharp right down a secondary maintenance hallway that only senior management even knew existed. At the very end of this narrow, unpainted corridor was a single, unmarked elevator. I reached into my silver purse, moving my fingers past the crumpled $50 bill, and pulled out a sleek, solid black keycard. There was no hotel logo on it, just a tiny magnetic strip. I pressed it against the hidden scanner embedded in the wall. A soft chime echoed, and the polished steel doors slid open silently. I stepped inside and pressed the single illuminated button for the top floor. As the elevator shot upward, leaving the noise, the grease, and the blatant disrespect far below me, I let out a long, steady breath. The Grand Atrium Hotel was not just a venue I happened to work at. It was the crown jewel of my real estate portfolio. I had purchased the failing property 4 years ago under a blind corporate trust, poured millions of dollars into a massive renovation, and transformed it into the most exclusive luxury destination in the city. My family had absolutely no idea. They thought I was just a mid-level regional manager for some generic, nameless hospitality conglomerate. Over the years, they had never bothered to ask for the details of my career, and I had never bothered to offer them. They were completely content believing I was a boring corporate drone and I preferred the privacy. But tonight that privacy was going to end. The elevator chimed, and the doors opened directly into a sprawling, glass-walled executive office that overlooked the glittering downtown skyline. Standing by a massive marble conference table, meticulously reviewing a stack of event manifests, was David. David was my general manager. A brilliant, fiercely loyal man in his late 40s who ran the daily operations of the Grand Atrium with military precision. He was the one who executed my vision, and he respected me more than my own parents ever had. He looked up quickly as the elevator doors opened, his face breaking into a warm, welcoming smile. "Good evening, boss," he said, setting his papers down. "I did not expect to see you up here tonight. I figured you would be down in the main ballroom celebrating with your family." The custom ice sculpture they requested was an absolute nightmare for the staff to install, but I have to admit it looks spectacular under the chandeliers. I walked over to the sleek leather sofa in the center of the room and sat down, dropping my purse onto the glass coffee table. "I am not celebrating David," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I just got physically escorted out of the main lobby by your security team." David froze. He actually stopped breathing for a second. His professional composure completely shattered as he stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute horror. "I beg your pardon," he stammered, taking a step toward me. "Did you just say security threw you out of your own hotel?" "Yes," I replied. crossing my legs and leaning back against the leather cushions. Apparently, the groom provided the security detail with a printed photograph of my face, complete with a red line drawn diagonally through it. I was dragged out to the loading dock and told that my corporate aesthetic did not fit the vibe of their high society influencer engagement party. My brother handed me $50 and instructed me to go wait in my car until it was time for me to carry the gifts to his apartment. The color completely drained from David's face. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. The idea that his staff had laid hands on the owner of the company was his worst nightmare. "Boss, I swear to you on my life I had absolutely no idea," David said, his voice rising in panic. "The security team for the ballroom was contracted out specifically at your brother's aggressive request. He insisted on bringing in outside muscle. I will terminate their contract right this second. I will march down to the ballroom and personally throw him and his entire party out onto the street." I held up a hand, stopping him before he could reach for the phone on the conference table. "Do not touch the security guards, David," I commanded. "They were just following the explicit instructions given to them by the client. What I want to know right now is how the client is paying for all of this." David blinked clearly, struggling to pivot from sheer panic to financial logistics. "Paying for it?" David asked, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean my brother is flat broke," I explained, keeping my tone analytical and cold. "He has not held a steady job in 3 years. His fiancée makes a few $1,000s a month posting sponsored content on the internet. Yet they are downstairs, drinking vintage imported champagne, eating premium caviar, and hosting 300 guests in our grand ballroom. This entire event has to be pushing at least $150,000. Did he put down a cash deposit?" David looked deeply confused. He turned around, walked over to his heavy oak desk, and pulled open a thick leather event binder. "Natalie, he did not put down a deposit at all," David said, tracing his finger down a ledger. "He bypassed the standard billing department entirely. When he approached us to book the venue 2 months ago, he was incredibly demanding. He wanted the presidential suite for the entire weekend and the premium 6-figure catering package." I raised an eyebrow. "And you approved a massive package like that without a cash deposit?" "Of course not," David said quickly, flipping rapidly through the glossy pages of the binder. "I told him our policy required a 50% wire transfer up front for an event of that magnitude. But he got incredibly arrogant with me. He told me he did not need to wire any money because the entire event was completely covered under corporate authorization." "Corporate authorization?" I repeated the words, feeling heavy and foreign in the quiet room. "Yes," David confirmed, pulling a thick piece of paper from the back flap of the binder. "He told me his new venture capital firm had secured a platinum line of credit directly with our parent company, Apex Hospitality." He handed over a signed corporate guarantee document. It authorized the hotel to bill the entire engagement party, including the penthouse suite and the custom catering, directly to the corporate master account. He even included a line item for a $90,000 jewelry purchase, which I can only assume was the engagement ring he proposed with last week. The silence in the penthouse office became absolute. The distant twinkling lights of the city skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows felt completely disconnected from the cold reality settling over the room. David looked at me, his confusion deepening into something much darker as he registered the blank expression on my face. "Boss, the documentation looked absolutely flawless," David explained defensively, walking over and handing me the piece of paper. "It had the official Apex Hospitality letterhead. It had the correct internal routing numbers for our accounting department, and it had your direct signature at the bottom, authorizing the release of the funds. I assumed you had quietly sponsored the event as a lavish wedding gift to your brother, which is exactly why I made sure every single detail downstairs was absolutely perfect." My blood ran completely cold. I took the document from David's trembling hand and stared down at the crisp black ink. My brother had not just been rude to me in the hallway. He had not just been cruel and dismissive. He had crossed a legal line that I never in my wildest dreams anticipated. I walked around the massive oak desk and gently pushed David aside. I needed to see the digital trail for myself. I sat down in the heavy leather executive chair and quickly typed my master administrative credentials into the hotel financial mainframe. The system verified my identity and unlocked instantly. I typed my brother's name into the search bar. The master folio for the weekend loaded on the screen, and the sheer volume of the charges made my stomach physically turn. I scrolled slowly down the itemized digital ledger. The audacity of his spending was staggering. 4 nights in our exclusive presidential suite at $5,000 a night. A premium open bar package featuring only top-tier imported liquors and vintage champagnes. 3 separate beluga caviar tasting stations. The live string quartet. The custom ice sculpture. A dedicated team of 5 private servers. But the catering and the venue were not even the worst part. Buried right in the middle of the approved vendor payouts was a direct wire transfer to a high-end downtown jeweler. The amount was exactly $90,000. I clicked on the transaction to expand the details. It was a finalized payment for a custom platinum band featuring a flawless 4-carat diamond. He had not even paid for Jasmine's engagement ring. He had billed his own fiancée's jewelry to my company as a corporate event expense. I dug deeper into the billing history. He had even charged the valet services and the professional photography crew to the corporate account. Every single flash of a camera downstairs, every forced smile from my parents, was literally being subsidized by my hard work. I thought back to my father in the hallway, loudly demanding that I compromise and be a team player. He had weaponized the memory of my stolen college fund to justify Brandon's arrogance, completely blind to the fact that his golden boy was currently stealing from me on a massive federal scale. The grand total, sitting in bold red numbers at the bottom of the screen, was an astronomical $150,000. I clicked on the attached PDF file, labeled as the corporate guarantee form. It loaded on the screen in high resolution. I stared at the signature on the primary authorization line. It was my name, Natalie, written in thick blue ink. But it was not my handwriting. The loop on the first letter was much too sharp. The slant of the cursive was entirely wrong. It was a sloppy, arrogant forgery. How did he even get this document, I asked, my voice deadly quiet. David swallowed hard, pointing at the screen. He emailed it directly to our billing department 3 weeks ago from his business email address. It came with a message saying he had already cleared the expenditure with senior corporate management. The pieces of his pathetic scheme rapidly snapped into place. Brandon must have downloaded a standard vendor guarantee template from the public Apex corporate website. He filled it out and signed my name. He knew I worked for Apex Hospitality. He knew I was in an upper management position. He clearly assumed that in a massive corporate structure, the local accounting department would just process the finalized paperwork without ever double-checking with me directly. Or worse, he assumed that if I did find out, I would be too terrified of a public family scandal to report him for fraud. He thought I would just take the financial hit quietly, cover his tracks to save my own job, and protect his golden child image, just like I had been trained to do my entire life. The absolute gravity of his delusion crashed over me. Brandon was not a venture capitalist. He had no wealthy investors. He had no real estate portfolio. He was completely, unequivocally broke. He was a 30-year-old man drowning in massive debt, desperately trying to lock down an image-obsessed influencer fiancé by playing the role of a self-made billionaire. And he was funding this entire theatrical performance by literally stealing from the sister he had just banished to a dirty loading dock. He had looked me right in the eyes, tossed a crumpled $50 bill at my chest, and told me I did not fit his aesthetic, all while I was secretly paying for every single sip of champagne he swallowed. David stood hovering over my shoulder, watching my eyes scan the forged document. He fully realized what he was looking at. The color drained from his face again. Boss David whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and outrage. That is not just a breach of contract. That is felony wire fraud. That is identity theft over $100,000. I can call the local police precinct right now. We can have uniformed officers walking into that ballroom in 3 minutes to arrest him. My hand hovered over the phone on the desk. It would be so incredibly easy to make the call. It would be a swift, brutal end to the night. But as I pictured Brandon being led out in handcuffs, I also pictured my mother weeping, throwing her arms around him, spinning the narrative to make him look like a tragic victim of a misunderstanding. I could already hear my mother's excuses. She would say he was just under a lot of pressure. She would say he fully intended to pay the company back once his imaginary business took off. She would demand that I drop the charges to protect the family name, and if I refused, I would be branded the ultimate traitor. I pictured Jasmine pulling out her phone, going live to her hundreds of thousands of followers, crying about how a cruel, jealous hotel manager ruined her fairy tale engagement. If I just called the police now, I would simply be playing the villain in their fabricated story. I had played that exhausting game for 3 decades. I was not going to give them the opportunity to gaslight me ever again. I lowered my hand and leaned back in the chair, keeping my eyes locked on the forged signature glaring at me from the bright monitor. No, I said quietly, the cold calculation completely taking over my mind. Not yet. Having the police sweep the ballroom right now would just give them the dramatic, tragic spotlight they crave. I do not want to just stop a party, David. I want to systematically dismantle his entire illusion. I want the ground to fall out from under him so completely that my parents cannot possibly find a way to blame me for it. I stood up from the desk and smoothed the front of my jacket. I looked at David, who was staring at me with a mixture of awe and absolute readiness. "We are not going to call the authorities tonight," I told him, my tone shifting into pure corporate command. "We are going to handle this internally first. We are going to treat this exactly like what it is. An unauthorized, fraudulent event occupying our premium space without a single cent of valid payment." David nodded slowly, his posture straightening as he mirrored my resolve. "What are your orders, boss?" I looked past him out the glass windows at the city below, feeling more powerful and in control than I ever had in my entire life. The time for being the quiet, reliable sister was dead and buried. Brandon wanted to play high-stakes corporate games. It was time to show him who actually owned the board. I turned back to David, who was standing at attention waiting for my command. "The contract is completely void," I told him, keeping my voice incredibly steady. "This event is entirely unauthorized and unfunded. I want you to initiate an immediate and total shutdown of the main ballroom." David pulled his two-way radio from his belt. "What are the specific parameters, boss? I want the string quartet to stop playing immediately," I instructed. "Tell the engineering department to cut the ambient mood lighting and turn the house lights up to their maximum harsh brightness. Send the entire banquet staff into the room with rolling carts. I want every single piece of food, every drop of alcohol, and especially those 3 caviar towers wheeled back into the kitchen right this second. And David." He paused, his thumb hovering over the transmission button. "Do not let anyone touch that customized sculpture," I added, feeling a cold smirk form on my lips. "Let it sit right in the middle of the room under the bright lights so they can watch it melt." "Understood," David said. He raised the radio to his mouth and began issuing the rapid-fire commands to the department heads downstairs. I listened as he systematically dismantled the social event of the season with brutal corporate efficiency. I walked around the desk and took a seat in the heavy leather executive chair. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, pouring myself a glass. Then I placed my cell phone flat on the center of the mahogany desk and waited. I did not have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, the screen of my phone lit up, vibrating aggressively against the polished wood. The caller identification flashed with my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my water, savoring the absolute quiet of the penthouse office. On the 4th ring, I pressed the speakerphone button. "Hello," I said, my tone perfectly pleasant and completely unbothered. "Natalie." My mother shrieked. Her voice was so loud and panicked that the speaker on my phone actually crackled. The background noise coming through the line was pure, unadulterated chaos. I could hear people shouting in confusion, the loud clattering of heavy dishes being aggressively cleared away, and the distinct high-pitched sound of Jasmine sobbing hysterically. "Mom," I asked, feigning mild confusion. "It sounds really loud over there. Is everything okay with the generational family portraits?" "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed, completely ignoring my question. "What on earth did you do? The hotel owner just shut everything down." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "What do you mean, shut everything down?" "They turned on the emergency lights, right in the middle of Jasmine's champagne toast." My mother wailed, her voice trembling with absolute panic. A small army of waiters just marched in and literally snatched the plates of food right out from under the guests. They took the caviar. They took the imported alcohol. The string quartet packed up their instruments and ran out the back door. The banquet manager just handed Brandon a massive invoice and told him the party is over because of fraudulent activity. Everyone is staring at us. Jasmine is having a full-blown panic attack by the ice sculpture. "What did you say to the staff when you were back there in the hallway?" I took another calm sip of my water. The sheer desperation in her voice was like music, far better than the classical string quartet she had been enjoying just moments ago. "Mom, I really have no idea what you are talking about," I said, keeping my voice utterly innocent and detached. "Do not lie to me," she snapped. "You were angry that Brandon kicked you out. You went and complained to some manager, did you not? You threw a jealous fit and ruined your brother's special night just because you could not stand to see him happy and successful." I let out a soft, dismissive sigh. "Mom, I am not even in the building. Brandon had his security guards drag me to the loading dock, remember? He tossed $50 at me and told me to go away. You and Dad stood right there and watched it happen. You told me to go wait in my car. So that is exactly what I did. I am currently sitting in the parking lot across the street eating a cheeseburger." There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line, save for the sound of Jasmine wailing in the background that her influencer friends were leaving and deleting their social media tags. "You are in your car?" my mother asked, her tone shifting from rage to deep, frantic confusion. "But if you did not do this, then why are they saying the credit line is fraudulent? Brandon said his venture capital firm paid for everything. He is a millionaire. Why are they kicking us out?" "That sounds like a terrible misunderstanding," I replied, my voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Maybe his venture capital firm has a cash flow problem. Or maybe his corporate authorization was not as legitimate as he thought it was. Either way, it sounds like a financial issue between Brandon and the hotel ownership. I am just a guest who got kicked out for not fitting the aesthetic. There is absolutely nothing I can do to help you." "Natalie, please." My mother begged, the arrogant entitlement completely gone, replaced by humiliating desperation. "You work in the hospitality industry. You know how these corporate venues operate. Please come back inside. Talk to the manager for us. Use your corporate connections to fix this. We cannot let Jasmine's friends see us getting evicted from a ballroom. Please, you have to save us." I looked at David, who was standing near the door, a look of pure satisfaction on his face as he listened to the exchange. I looked down at the forged corporate guarantee, still glowing brightly on my computer screen. They had spent my entire life taking my resources, demanding my obedience, and shoving me into the shadows whenever it suited them. And even now, as their fake empire collapsed around them, their first instinct was to demand that I act as their shield. "I cannot help you, Mom," I said, letting the icy reality bleed into my voice. "You and Dad told me that tonight was about Brandon and his high society friends. You said I needed to step aside, so I am stepping aside. Good luck with the bill." "Natalie, wait, do not you dare hang up on me," she shrieked. I reached out and tapped the red button on my screen. The line went completely dead. The silence returned to the penthouse, thick and incredibly satisfying. I sat there for a moment, letting the magnitude of what I had just done wash over me. I had not just canceled a party. I had fundamentally and permanently severed the toxic dynamic that had defined my entire existence. I had stopped playing the willing victim. David cleared his throat softly. The ballroom is successfully cleared, boss. The guests are currently being escorted out the front doors by our security team. Your brother is at the front desk, screaming at the concierge demanding to speak to the owner. I smiled, picking up my purse. Let him scream. He will meet the owner soon enough. I stood up, walked to the private elevator, and headed down to the secure underground parking garage. I drove home to my apartment, completely ignoring the 37 missed calls and frantic text messages flooding my phone for the rest of the night. The fallout was going to be spectacular, but tonight I was going to sleep better than I had in 34 years. The morning sunlight streaming through my bedroom windows was bright and incredibly peaceful. For the first time in my entire life, I had woken up without that familiar heavy knot of anxiety sitting in my chest. I stretched my arms, enjoying the absolute quiet of my sanctuary. Then the sharp scrape of metal against a tumbler echoed loudly from the front hallway. Before I could even throw off the duvet, my heavy oak front door banged open. The sound of angry, aggressive footsteps stomped across the hardwood floor of my living room. I quickly pulled on a silk robe, tied the belt tightly around my waist, and walked out of my bedroom. I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing right in the center of my apartment were my parents, my brother Brandon, and his fiancée Jasmine. My mother had actually used the emergency spare key I gave her 2 years ago for watering my plants. They looked like the absolute walking dead. Brandon was still wearing his tuxedo trousers from the night before. His expensive white dress shirt was wrinkled and his black bow tie was completely undone, hanging loosely around his neck. My father looked utterly exhausted, his face red with suppressed, simmering rage. My mother was clutching her designer purse tightly against her chest like a weapon. But Jasmine was without a doubt the worst of them all. Her expensive emerald green gown was stained with spilled drinks. Her fake eyelashes were hanging by a thread, and her carefully styled hair was a ratty, tangled mess. She was aggressively scrolling through her phone, tears streaming continuously down her face, leaving thick black streaks of ruined mascara on her cheeks. "How could you do this to me?" Jasmine screamed the absolute second she saw me. Her voice was raw, scratchy, and filled with genuine venom. She lunged forward, thrusting her glowing phone screen mere inches from my face. "Do you see this number, Natalie? Do you see it? I have lost 40,000 followers since last night." 40,000. I took a step back, maintaining my distance. "Good morning to you too," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "And please take a step back before you drop your phone on my rug." Jasmine let out a sound that was half sob and half shriek. "You think this is funny? My entire career is completely ruined. I was mid-sentence doing a live stream to 80,000 people for my exclusive champagne sponsor, and the house lights snapped on like it was last call at a cheap dive bar. Your waiters literally rolled my premium caviar station right out of the camera frame. And then the banquet manager walked right up to Brandon and handed him a piece of paper, loudly announcing that our payment method was fraudulent. On a live stream, Natalie, she began pacing frantically across my living room, waving her arms in the air. 2 elite bridal boutiques just emailed me an hour ago to cancel their dress sponsorships. They said I am a massive brand risk because the internet is currently calling me a broke scammer. People were recording us getting escorted out to the street by your security guards. The videos are everywhere. I am a complete laughingstock because of you." Brandon stepped squarely in front of Jasmine, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to look physically intimidating. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You went behind my back and abused your managerial access," he barked, spit flying from his lips. "You threw a pathetic, jealous tantrum because I told you to wait in your car. So you went into your hotel's computer system and manually canceled my corporate credit line just to publicly humiliate us." I looked at him, truly marveling at his absolute delusion. They still had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. They genuinely believed I was just a petty mid-level administrative employee who had thrown a wrench in the system out of spite. They thought my power was limited to a computer password and a vindictive attitude. My mother stepped forward, her face twisted in utter disappointment, playing her usual role as the ultimate guilt tripper. "We raised you better than this, Natalie," she scolded, her tone dripping with condescension. "To sabotage your own flesh and blood just because you felt a little left out of the spotlight. The entire family is humiliated. Your father and I had to cancel our country club brunch this morning because our friends saw the horrible videos Jasmine posted online. You used your little job to destroy your brother's most important night." My father slammed his heavy hand down on my kitchen counter, making my ceramic coffee mugs rattle against the marble. "We are not leaving this apartment until you fix this massive mess you created," he demanded loudly. "You are going to get dressed right now, march back to that hotel, and use whatever little administrative override you have to reinstate his corporate account immediately. And then you are going to force the general manager of the building to issue a formal public apology to Jasmine, stating that the venue made a massive billing error on their end." "My aesthetic is completely destroyed," Jasmine cried, dropping heavily onto my expensive linen sofa without even bothering to ask for permission. I had a major magazine spread lined up for next month. They were going to feature my wedding as the high society event of the year. Now the editor will not even return my text messages. Everyone in my circle thinks we are completely broke. "You better pray I do not call your corporate office and report you for malicious misconduct." Brandon threatened, his voice dropping into what he probably thought was a menacing, powerful tone. "I will have you fired by the end of the day. I will make sure you never work in the hospitality industry again." "Do you realize the kind of people I know, Natalie? I can make one single phone call and your little administrative career is over." I looked at my brother, feeling a genuine, powerful wave of amusement wash over me. He was standing right in the middle of my apartment, threatening to get me fired from the multi-million-dollar company that I personally owned using a fake network of powerful billionaire friends that simply did not exist. First of all, I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm and authoritative, "Mother, put your spare key on the kitchen counter right now. You just permanently lost your emergency access privileges because this is an illegal break-in. Secondly, Brandon, I did not cancel your credit line out of jealousy or spite. I canceled it because it was a completely forged document." Brandon flinched. It was just a tiny, barely noticeable twitch in his jaw, but I caught it. He quickly recovered, puffing his chest out even further to mask his rising panic. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about," he lied smoothly. "That was a completely legitimate authorization from my venture capital partners." "No, it was not," I replied coldly, staring directly into his eyes, so he knew I had all the power. "You signed my name on an Apex Hospitality corporate guarantee form to steal $150,000 in luxury services. You committed felony fraud. Stop making up ridiculous lies to cover your own tracks." My mother interrupted, her voice shrill and deeply defensive. "Brandon is a highly successful investor. He does not need to forge anything. You just cannot stand the undeniable fact that he is doing so much better in life than you are. You have always been so bitterly competitive with him, Natalie, and frankly, it is exhausting." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply let them dig their own graves deeper into my living room floor, fully prepared for the absurd demands I knew they were going to throw at me next. Brandon immediately seized the lifeline my mother had just thrown him. Knowing he had the blind, unwavering support of our parents, his brief moment of panic vanished completely, replaced by a terrifying, aggressive arrogance. He took 2 large steps forward, invading my personal space, forcing me to tilt my head up just to look him in the eye. "You are totally insane!" Brandon spat, his voice dropping into a low, threatening growl. "There is no forgery. You know it and I know it. You saw my success. You saw Jasmine getting the attention you desperately crave, and you snapped. You used your little system administrator privileges to cancel a perfectly valid corporate credit line just to publicly humiliate us." I did not back away. I held my ground on my own hardwood floor. "You do not have a corporate credit line, Brandon," I stated clearly. "You do not have a venture capital firm. You do not have investors. You are unemployed and drowning in debt." Brandon let out a loud, theatrical laugh, throwing his arms wide open. "Listen to yourself," he mocked, turning to look at our parents. "She is completely delusional. She is literally making up conspiracy theories because she is about to lose her job. He turned back to me, his eyes narrowing into cold, malicious slits. I am going to sue you, Natalie. I am going to sue you, and I am going to sue the Grand Atrium Hotel. My lawyers will drag you into civil court for defamation, breach of contract, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. By the time I am done with you, you will be held personally liable for millions of dollars. You will be completely bankrupt. Before I could even respond to his absurd imaginary legal team, my father violently inserted himself into the confrontation. He pushed past Brandon and pointed a thick, accusatory finger directly at my chest. "How dare you threaten your brother with wild accusations of fraud?" My father roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You are the most ungrateful, spiteful girl I have ever met. After everything this family has done for you, this is how you repay us. You try to destroy your brother's life on the most important night of his career." I stared at my father, the sheer audacity of his words echoing off the high ceilings of my living room. "What exactly has this family done for me?" I asked, my voice remaining quiet but laced with absolute steel. My father threw his hands up in the air, looking around my pristine, expensive apartment as if he were deeply disgusted by it. "We put a roof over your head," he shouted. "Have you completely forgotten where you came from? We let you live in our basement for 2 whole years while you were in your 20s. We fed you. We supported you while you sat down there playing startup with your foolish little business ideas. We gave you a safe harbor when you had absolutely nothing, and now that you have a decent corporate salary, you think you can look down on the brother who is actually trying to build a real empire." I stood perfectly still, letting his revisionist history wash over me. I stared at the man who called himself my father, marveling at how easily he could completely rewrite reality to suit his golden child narrative. He conveniently forgot to mention that the basement he so graciously let me live in was completely unfinished. It had exposed concrete walls, no heating, and flooded with 2 inches of dirty water every single time it rained. He forgot to mention that I paid them $1,000 a month in rent just for the privilege of sleeping on a damp mattress next to the water heater. But the most staggering hypocrisy of all was his complete ignorance of what I was actually doing down in that freezing basement. While he thought I was playing startup and wasting my time, I was working 90-hour weeks, skipping meals, and meticulously building the foundation of a real estate portfolio. My foolish little business idea was Apex Hospitality. I was building the very multi-million-dollar empire that he was currently standing inside of, the exact same empire his precious son was currently trying to steal from. And while I was freezing in their basement paying them rent, they had taken every single penny of my childhood college fund and handed it directly to Brandon so he could rent a luxury penthouse loft downtown for a tech company that never even launched a single product. "I paid you rent every single month I lived in that basement, Dad," I said, keeping my facts incredibly precise. "And my startup did just fine without a single cent of your financial support." "It does not matter if you paid rent," my mother shrieked, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with my father and brother. "You owe this family respect. Family supports family. Brandon is a visionary. He takes big risks. You are just a paper pusher at a hotel. You should be honored that he even chose your venue to host his engagement party." Jasmine let out another loud, dramatic sob from the sofa, dragging the attention back to her ruined aesthetic. "None of this matters right now," she wailed, wiping her ruined mascara with the back of her hand. "Who cares about basements and rent? What matters is that my entire digital brand is completely destroyed. My sponsors are dropping me. My followers are laughing at me. I have suffered severe emotional trauma because of your petty jealousy, Natalie." Jasmine stood up from the sofa, swaying slightly on her expensive heels, and marched over to join the solid wall of my family standing aggressively in my living room. She crossed her arms over her stained designer dress and glared at me with absolute hatred. "You do not just get to say sorry and walk away from this," Jasmine demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You humiliated me in front of hundreds of thousands of people. You ruined my life. You owe me a massive public apology and you are going to pay for the damages you caused. Brandon nodded firmly, wrapping his arm protectively around Jasmine's shoulder. That is exactly right, he agreed, looking down his nose at me. You caused this disaster, Natalie, and now you are going to fix it. We are not leaving this apartment until you make this right. They had formed a unified front in my own home. They had successfully convinced themselves that I was the ultimate villain, the jealous, bitter sister who had lashed out at their incredible success. They were entirely oblivious to the absolute financial and legal cliff they were currently standing on. I watched them puff up their chests, completely unaware that the ground beneath their feet had already crumbled away. They were ready to make their demands, and I was more than ready to let them speak. My mother was the first to break the brief silence in my living room. She reached into her heavy leather handbag and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. She stepped forward and slapped it down on the marble counter right in front of me. I did not look at the paper immediately. Instead, I slowly moved my right hand backward, resting it casually on the kitchen island, right next to where my phone was lying face down. Without taking my eyes off my mother, I blindly felt for the side button on the device. I double-clicked it. A tiny, silent vibration against my fingertips confirmed that the voice memo application was actively recording every single word spoken in the room. "Read it, Natalie," my mother commanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the paper. "That is an itemized budget for a premium destination wedding in Lake Como, Italy. Jasmine has already spoken to a high-end crisis management public relations team this morning. They advised her that the only possible way to recover her social media brand after last night's public humiliation is to host an exclusive, highly aesthetic European wedding. The total cost is $100,000. Jasmine sniffled loudly, glaring at me from across the room. "It has to be Italy," she insisted, her voice trembling with misplaced entitlement. "An Italian villa is the only venue prestigious enough to make my sponsors forget that I was kicked out of a hotel loading dock like a common criminal. And since you are the one who maliciously ruined my first wedding out of pure jealousy, you are going to pay for the second one." I looked down at the ridiculous printed spreadsheet. "You want me to give you $100,000? I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Where exactly do you think I am going to get that kind of cash?" "We know you have a corporate retirement account," my father barked, stepping closer to the counter. "You have been hoarding your salary for years while living like an absolute miser. You are a single woman. You do not have a family to support. Brandon does. You are going to call your financial provider first thing tomorrow morning, drain your retirement account, and wire the funds directly to Jasmine's wedding planner. And if you refuse," my mother added, her voice dropping into a cold, venomous whisper, "you are no longer a part of this family. We will completely cut you off. You will not be invited to holidays. You will not be welcome in our home. You will be entirely alone in this world, Natalie. So make your choice right now." They were actually threatening to take out the trash for me. The idea of never spending another agonizing Thanksgiving being compared to Brandon was not a punishment. It was a spectacular reward. But I needed more than just their hollow threats. I needed a concrete confession. I shifted my focus back to my brother, who was standing tall, looking incredibly pleased with the trap our parents had just laid out. "Let me get this straight," I said, leaning casually against the marble island. "You want me to drain my life savings to fix a financial problem that you created? If your venture capital firm is so wildly successful, Brandon, why did you have to forge my signature on an Apex hospitality guarantee form to pay for the party in the first place? Why did you not just use your own massive wealth?" Brandon scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest, completely falling for the bait. "Because my cash is tied up in high-yield investments right now. I did what I had to do to secure that venue. The hotel needed a piece of paper with a management signature to release the corporate credit, so I gave them one. It is just standard business leveraging, Natalie. You would not understand because you are just a low-level employee who takes orders from a boss. I used the resources available to me to build my brand. You are the one who overreacted and hit the panic button." Got him. He had just admitted to felony forgery out loud. in a room with 3 witnesses, while my phone recorded every single syllable in high-definition audio. I smiled. It was a wide, genuine smile that caused a sudden flash of unease to ripple across my mother's face. I picked up the printed itinerary for Lake Como, looked at it for 2 seconds, and then slowly and deliberately tore it right down the middle. I dropped the torn pieces onto the floor. "No," I said simply. Jasmine gasped loudly, bringing a hand up to her mouth. My father turned bright red, the veins bulging in his neck. "What did you just say to us?" he roared. "I said no," I repeated, pushing myself off the counter and standing up straight. "I am not paying for a luxury vacation in Italy. I am not draining my retirement accounts. And I am absolutely not apologizing for stopping a criminal from stealing $150,000 from my company." "Then you are completely dead to us," my father shouted, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Do not ever call us again. You are not our daughter." "Good," I replied, my voice slicing through his fake outrage like a surgical blade. "Because I am entirely done pretending we are a family. Now all 4 of you have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my apartment before I call the police and have you formally charged with trespassing and breaking and entering." Brandon stepped forward, raising his hand as if he was going to try and physically intimidate me again. But I reached backward, picked up my phone from the kitchen island, and held the screen up so they could all clearly see the red circle of the recording application pulsing brightly. "I have this entire conversation recorded," I informed them, watching all the color rapidly drain out of Brandon's arrogant face. "I have you demanding money to prevent you from disowning me, which is textbook extortion. And more importantly, I have you, Brandon, casually admitting that you forged a signature to secure a 6-figure corporate credit line. I highly suggest you turn around and walk out that door right now before I send this audio file directly to the local police precinct." Absolute panic instantly replaced the arrogance in the room. Jasmine let out a terrified whimper, grabbed her purse, and ran straight for the front door. My mother lunged forward desperately, trying to grab the phone from my hand, but I stepped back smoothly, keeping it easily out of her reach. My father grabbed her arm and pulled her roughly toward the hallway, muttering furious curses under his breath. Brandon stood frozen for a second, his eyes wide with a sudden, terrifying realization. The illusion of his power was completely shattered. He looked at me, realizing for the very first time that I held his entire future in the palm of my hand. "Time is up, Brandon," I said coldly, pointing toward the hallway. "Get out of my house." He did not say another word. He turned and fled. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them, leaving my apartment in absolute perfect silence. The silence in my apartment after the heavy oak door slammed shut was absolute perfection. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat down at my laptop. I genuinely expected them to spend the rest of the weekend licking their wounds, hiding in their apartment, and trying to figure out how they were going to pay off the massive financial debt they had just incurred. I severely underestimated the sheer desperate vanity of a lifestyle influencer who felt her carefully curated image slipping away. Exactly 2 hours after I kicked my family out of my home, my cell phone rang. The caller identification showed David, my general manager at the Grand Atrium Hotel. I answered it immediately. "Boss, I need you to open up your social media applications right now," David said. His usually calm, professional voice was laced with genuine urgency. "We are facing a massive, highly coordinated public relations attack." The front desk switchboard is completely lighting up with angry phone calls. People are screaming at our receptionists, and our online review pages are being absolutely flooded. I placed my coffee mug on the marble counter and opened my laptop. I navigated directly to Jasmine's main public profile. I did not even have to search for the video. It was pinned right to the top of her page, prominently featured, and it had already amassed over 800,000 views in a matter of hours. The engagement metrics were skyrocketing by the second. I clicked play, and my future sister-in-law filled the screen. She had completely dropped the glamorous, untouchable high society aesthetic she had paraded around the hotel loading dock the night before. Instead, she was sitting on the floor of what looked like her bedroom, wearing an oversized plain gray sweater to make herself appear small and fragile. She had intentionally wiped away most of her makeup, leaving just enough smudged mascara under her red eyes to look like she had been crying uncontrollably for days. It was a masterclass in digital victimhood, perfectly engineered to manipulate the emotions of her massive audience. I am making this video because I am completely heartbroken and traumatized. Jasmine started, her voice shaking perfectly on cue as she looked directly into the camera lens. Last night was supposed to be the most magical evening of my entire life. My amazing fiancé booked the Grand Atrium Hotel for our engagement party. We paid for a premium luxury package. We followed every single rule. But instead of celebrating our love, we were subjected to the most humiliating, discriminatory, and emotionally abusive experience imaginable. I watched as she slowly wiped a fake tear from her cheek with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. She completely omitted the undeniable fact that her fiancé had committed felony forgery. She conveniently forgot to mention that they had not paid a single dime of their own money. Instead, she spun a wildly fabricated, highly damaging narrative. She claimed that right in the middle of her heartfelt champagne toast, the hotel management suddenly interrupted the party and demanded double the contracted amount in cash. She told her followers that when they could not produce the extorted money on the spot, the staff aggressively threw them out onto the street like criminals. She painted the Grand Atrium as a predatory, elitist establishment that regularly scammed young couples out of their hard-earned money. But then she made her fatal, unforgivable mistake. She leaned closer to the camera, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "I want to tell you the real reason this happened to us," Jasmine said, her eyes narrowing. "This entire disaster was orchestrated out of pure spite by a bitter, low-level administrative employee named Natalie. Natalie happens to be my fiancé's sister. She has always been insanely jealous of our relationship and our success. Because she works in the back office of the hotel, she maliciously abused her employee access to cancel our completely valid corporate credit line just to ruin my special night. She is a toxic, miserable person who weaponized her little bit of corporate power to destroy my life. She literally put my full legal name on the internet, weaponizing her rabid fanbase against me. She knew exactly what she was doing. Brandon was undoubtedly sitting right off camera, hiding behind his fiancé's influencer status, letting her launch this preemptive public strike. They thought that by creating a massive online scandal, they could force the hotel to fire me to save face, while simultaneously bullying me into dropping the fraud issue. "Please," Jasmine begged her followers at the end of the video, clasping her hands together. "Do not ever stay at the Grand Atrium Hotel. They employ vindictive, discriminatory people who will ruin your life without a second thought. Share this video everywhere. Let everyone know what kind of corrupt business they are running. We are exploring all of our legal options against the hotel and against Natalie personally." I scrolled down to the comment section beneath the video. It was an absolute digital war zone. Thousands of people were tagging the official hotel accounts, demanding that I be fired immediately. The internet mob was blindly calling for my head. They were flooding our online review platforms, leaving thousands of one-star ratings based entirely on her lies, completely tanking the flawless 5-star reputation I had spent 4 years meticulously building with my own blood, sweat, and capital. Comments were rolling in, calling me a jealous spinster, a corporate tyrant, and demanding that Apex Hospitality issue a massive financial settlement to the poor, traumatized bride. David spoke through the phone, breaking the silence in my kitchen. "Boss, this is gaining traction faster than anything I have ever seen in my career. 2 major local news outlets just emailed our corporate press department asking for an official statement regarding the allegations of discrimination and extortion. If we do not shut this down right now, it could cause permanent, catastrophic damage to the Apex Hospitality brand. Should I contact our legal team and draft an immediate cease and desist letter? Should we release a public statement explaining the fraudulent credit line and exposing her lies?" I stared at the screen, watching Jasmine's fake, tearful face looping over and over again in silence. She really thought she was so incredibly smart. She was relying on the standard corporate playbook, assuming that a massive hospitality company would immediately fold under the pressure of a viral social media scandal and throw their mid-level employee to the wolves to make the public relations nightmare go away. But she had absolutely no idea that she was not dealing with a faceless, easily intimidated corporation. She was dealing with the sole owner of the entire empire. "Do not issue a press release," David Eist instructed, my voice completely cold and razor-sharp. "Do not respond to the local news outlets, and absolutely do not tell our legal team to send a cease and desist letter. I want you to leave her video exactly where it is. Let it stay live." David hesitated, his professional anxiety bleeding through the phone line. "But boss, the online reviews. The brand damage is accumulating by the minute. It is temporary." I interrupted smoothly, feeling a dark, intensely satisfying thrill rush through my veins. Let the internet mob scream. Let her followers share the video 1,000,000 times. To win a massive defamation lawsuit, you have to prove actual quantifiable financial damages. Every single view, every single share, and every single one-star review she incites is just adding another zero to the massive civil lawsuit we are going to drop directly on her head. She just publicly accused a multi-million-dollar enterprise of discriminatory business practices and openly slandered its chief executive officer. She did not just burn a bridge, David. She handed us the gasoline and the match. I closed my laptop with a sharp, decisive click. "Tell the front desk staff to completely ignore the angry phone calls. Document every single one-star review. Capture all the abusive comments and have the IT department download a high-resolution copy of that video right now before she realizes what a catastrophic mistake she has made." "Yes," Boss David agreed, his panic instantly replaced by a sharp, professional understanding of my strategy. "We will secure all the digital evidence immediately." "Good," I said, walking over to the window to look out at the city skyline. "Let Jasmine have her 24 hours of internet fame. She is going to desperately need the attention to comfort her when she realizes she has just successfully sued herself into absolute bankruptcy." I spent the rest of the afternoon watching my own company stock experience a mild, completely manageable dip while Jasmine's followers rioted in our comment sections. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and reviewed the quarterly earnings reports entirely unbothered by the digital circus. I knew my brother. I knew he was arrogant, but I also knew he was incredibly impatient. He would not be satisfied with just a social media mob. He wanted a tangible payout to fix his immediate financial crisis. Right on cue, at exactly 4 o'clock, a high-priority notification chimed on my laptop. It was an encrypted email forwarded directly from Jonathan, the lead corporate counsel for Apex Hospitality Group. The subject line was flagged in bright red. Jonathan had attached a brief note at the top of the forwarded message. It read, "Boss, this just came through the public-facing portal for the Hotel Ownership Board. It is addressed to the anonymous executive investors. I thought you would want to see this personally before we draft a response. It is a textbook extortion attempt." I scrolled down to read the original message. The sender was listed as Brandon, using his fake venture capital firm email address. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the marble counter, and began to read. Brandon had clearly spent hours writing this, desperately trying to sound like a seasoned, high-powered corporate litigator. The email was completely dripping in forced corporate jargon and hollow legal threats. To the board of directors and executive ownership of Apex Hospitality, the email began. "I am writing to you today as the chief executive officer of my own firm and as a highly influential client who was subjected to an unprecedented level of discrimination and harassment at your Grand Atrium property last night. As you are undoubtedly aware, my fiancée has already publicized this catastrophic failure of management on her platforms, resulting in a massive ongoing public relations crisis for your brand." I actually laughed out loud in my empty kitchen. He was trying to leverage the social media fire that he had explicitly told Jasmine to start presenting himself as a powerful businessman, offering a solution to a problem he created. The email continued. I am a reasonable man, and I prefer to settle disputes quietly without involving my legal team in a protracted multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit. I am willing to completely drop my impending litigation and ensure that my fiancé permanently deletes all viral videos regarding your hotel. However, my cooperation is strictly contingent upon your board meeting 3 non-negotiable demands. I took a sip of my coffee, genuinely fascinated by the sheer magnitude of his audacity. He had zero leverage, he had committed wire fraud. Yet he was making demands to a billionaire ownership board like he was holding all the cards. Demand number 1, Brandon wrote. You will immediately terminate the employment of the regional manager named Natalie. Her blatant display of jealousy, unprofessionalism, and gross misconduct is a massive liability to your company. She maliciously abused her system access to cancel my fully authorized corporate credit line. I require written proof of her termination by the end of the business week. He was trying to get me fired from my own company. He genuinely thought that if he yelled loud enough and threw enough legal buzzwords at a faceless board of investors, they would just blindly fire a mid-level employee to make the headache go away. He wanted to destroy my livelihood to protect his fragile ego. Demand number 2, the email went on. The Grand Atrium Hotel will issue a formal written public apology to my fiancé on all of your official corporate social media channels, stating that the disruption of our event was entirely due to an internal administrative error and malicious employee misconduct. And then came the absolute climax of his delusion. Demand number 3. To compensate for the severe emotional distress, brand damage, and the complete destruction of our engagement party, Apex Hospitality will provide us with a fully complimentary, all-inclusive destination wedding package. This package will be hosted at your premium European property, the Apex Villa in Lake Como, Italy. We expect a budget allocation of no less than $300,000, entirely comped by your corporate office, covering all flights, accommodations, and premium catering for 100 VIP guests. I read the final demand 3 times, letting the staggering weight of his greed truly sink in. Earlier that morning, they had stood in my living room and demanded I drain my retirement account to give them $100,000 for a wedding. When I kicked them out, Brandon simply pivoted. He multiplied the number by 3 and tried to extort the money directly from the corporate entity he thought I worked for. He ended the email with a final pathetic threat. If these terms are not met, and a formal sit-down is not scheduled within 48 hours, my lawyers will file the lawsuit and the viral campaign against your brand will escalate. The choice is yours. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. The psychological profile of my brother was laid out perfectly in those paragraphs. He was a parasite. He had spent his entire life successfully manipulating our parents into giving him whatever he wanted, and he genuinely believed those same childish manipulation tactics would work on a multi-million-dollar corporate board. He thought he was backing a massive corporation into a corner. He thought he was brilliant. He did not know that the hotel ownership board email address was just an auto-forwarding system. It did not go to a room full of old, intimidated investors in tailored suits. It routed directly to the legal department of my holding company, which ultimately reported directly to me. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Jonathan's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "Have you read it?" Jonathan asked, his voice maintaining its usual calm, analytical tone. "I read it," I replied, staring at the demand for my own termination. It is a masterpiece of self-incrimination. He is actively demanding $300,000 in services to hide the fact that he already forged a corporate guarantee for $150,000. He just handed us a textbook case for extortion on a silver platter. Jonathan cleared his throat. "I can have the local authorities pick him up at his apartment within the hour, boss. We have the forged signature. We have the audio recording from your living room. And now we have a written extortion demand sent across state lines via email. It is a federal offense." I tapped my fingernail against the marble counter, considering the swift, brutal option. But again, having the police arrest him at his apartment would let him play the victim. It would give my parents the opportunity to bail him out and claim he was just a confused, desperate young man who made a paperwork error. No, I told Jonathan, my voice dropping into a register of pure calculating ice. Do not call the authorities. He wants a formal sit-down with the corporate ownership board. He wants to look the executives in the eye and demand his free $300,000 wedding. I say we give him exactly what he is asking for. I told Jonathan to draft the response immediately. I walked over to the massive mahogany conference table in my penthouse office and opened my laptop, instructing Jonathan to share his screen with me so I could oversee every single word. I wanted the email to sound exactly like what Brandon expected to receive. I wanted it to sound like it was coming from a terrified, faceless corporate board that was desperately trying to put out a massive public relations fire. Jonathan and I spent the next 20 minutes crafting the absolute perfect piece of bait. We used heavy, formal corporate letterhead. We made sure my name was completely omitted from the sender's signature. Instead, the email was sent directly from the Office of Executive Acquisitions and Legal Affairs for Apex Hospitality Group. We crafted the tone to be highly accommodating, carefully stroking his massive ego while simultaneously locking him into his own extortion scheme. Dear Brandon, Jonathan typed, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard. The Executive Ownership Board of Apex Hospitality Group has received your correspondence and reviewed your demands. We treat allegations of gross employee misconduct and discriminatory business practices with the utmost severity. The viral video posted by your fiancé has indeed caught the attention of our senior investors. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. Tell him we are open to his terms, I instructed. Make him believe he has us completely cornered. Jonathan nodded and continued typing. We deeply value our high-profile clients and prefer to settle disputes of this nature outside of the public eye. The board is highly motivated to reach an amicable resolution regarding the termination of the employee in question, the formal public apology, and the complimentary wedding package at our Lake Como property. However, a settlement of this financial magnitude requires an in-person authorization. We formally invite you and your representatives to our downtown corporate headquarters tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to finalize this agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal manipulation. We did not actually promise him anything. We simply stated that we were motivated to reach a resolution and required his presence to discuss it. But to a narcissist like Brandon, reading that email would feel like an absolute unconditional surrender from a billion-dollar corporation. We hit send. And then we waited. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the busy city streets below. Jonathan stayed on the line, the silent anticipation hanging heavy in the air. I knew my brother better than anyone. I knew he was sitting in his apartment right now, frantically refreshing his inbox, sweating through his shirt as he waited to see if his massive gamble had paid off. It took exactly 14 minutes for the reply to arrive. Jonathan cleared his throat, reading the response out loud over the speakerphone. Brandon says, and I quote, "I accept your invitation. My legal team and my family will be arriving at your corporate headquarters tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp. I expect the termination paperwork for the employee named Natalie to be fully drafted and ready for my review upon arrival. Do not waste my time." A cold, genuine laugh escaped my lips. His legal team. He did not have a legal team. He was going to bring our parents and his influencer fiancé to act as his entourage. He was going to march them all into my building, completely convinced that he was the smartest man in the entire city. He had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Excellent, I said to Jonathan. Tell the receptionist at the main corporate building to expect them. I want them treated with the absolute highest level of professional courtesy when they walk through the front doors. Offer them sparkling water. Offer them premium coffee. Make them feel like absolute royalty right up until the second those boardroom doors close behind them. Jonathan chuckled, the sound dry and professional. I will have the security team standing by discreetly in the adjacent hallway just in case they become physically aggressive when the reality of the situation sets in. Shall I prepare the standard non-disclosure agreements? No non-disclosure agreements, I replied firmly. I want everything they say tomorrow on the official corporate record. I want the physical copies of the forged corporate guarantee placed in a manila folder at the head of the table. I want the itemized invoice for the $48,000 in damages from the engagement party printed and ready. And Jonathan. Yes, boss. Make sure my chair at the head of the table is facing the double doors I instructed. I want to see the exact moment the realization hits their faces. Understood, Jonathan said before ending the call to finalize the preparations. I closed my laptop and let out a long, slow breath. The trap was officially set. The sheer audacity of what they were trying to pull was almost difficult to comprehend. My parents had spent my entire life telling me to make myself smaller so Brandon could look bigger. They had trained me to absorb his failures to fund his lifestyle and to quietly accept the blame whenever he made a mistake. Tomorrow, that lifelong dynamic was going to be publicly and permanently shattered. Just as I was gathering my things to leave the penthouse office, my personal cell phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from Brandon. I unlocked the phone and read the message. It was oozing with arrogant cruelty. Hope you enjoyed your little power trip last night, the text read. Pack up your desk. Corporate just begged me for a meeting tomorrow morning to settle my lawsuit. They are giving us Italy, and they are firing you to save their brand. You are completely done in this industry. I told you not to mess with me. I stared at the glowing text message, feeling a deep, profound sense of finality settle into my bones. He could not resist gloating. He had to twist the knife one last time, completely unaware that he was holding the blade backward. He wanted to make sure I was terrified before he went to sleep. I did not reply to his message. I did not block his number. I simply turned off my phone, slid it back into my purse, and walked to the private elevator. Let him enjoy his final night of delusional grandeur. Let my parents celebrate their golden child's brilliant negotiation skills. Let Jasmine post another tearful video to her followers promising them that justice was about to be served. They were currently standing at the absolute peak of their fabricated mountain, completely blind to the massive cliff right in front of them. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. I felt incredibly calm. I was going to go home, eat a good dinner, and get a full 8 hours of sleep. Tomorrow morning, I was going to put on my best executive suit, walk into my own corporate boardroom, and legally annihilate the parasites who had disguised themselves as my family. The next morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky that perfectly matched the absolute clarity in my mind. I woke up early, drank my coffee, and opened my closet to select my armor for the day. I bypassed the understated corporate wear I usually wore to family functions and pulled out a custom-tailored pitch-black designer suit. I paired it with a pair of sharp black leather stilettos. I did not want to look like a mid-level manager today. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, the absolute final authority in the room. I arrived at the Apex Hospitality Group corporate headquarters a full hour before the scheduled meeting. The building itself was a towering 70-story monolith of glass and steel in the center of the downtown financial district. It was designed to project immense power and stability. I took the private executive elevator directly to the top floor and walked into the primary surveillance room, located just behind the main boardroom. Jonathan and David were already there, standing beside a bank of high-definition monitors that displayed live feeds from every single camera in the building lobby. Right on time, Jonathan noted, pointing to the largest screen on the wall. It was 9:45. Through the wide-angle lens of the lobby camera, I watched my family walk through the massive revolving glass doors. It was like watching a masterclass in aggressive, unearned arrogance. They marched into the building completely brimming with a false sense of absolute victory. Brandon was leading the pack. He was wearing a stark white dress shirt and a shiny navy blue suit that looked completely rigid, as if it had been rented that exact morning. In his right hand, he was gripping a sleek black leather briefcase. I knew with absolute certainty that the briefcase was entirely empty, brought along simply as a theatrical prop to make him look like a seasoned corporate litigator. Jasmine was walking right beside him, completely ignoring the professional atmosphere of a corporate financial building. She was dressed in a tight, bright crimson cocktail dress that would have been better suited for a nightclub, holding her phone up at an angle to record the soaring marble ceilings of the lobby. She was undoubtedly broadcasting to her remaining followers, feeding them a live narrative about how she was bravely marching into the belly of the beast to demand justice from the evil corporation that had wronged her. A few paces behind them, my parents brought up the rear. My father, Richard, was wearing his best country club blazer, looking around the massive lobby with a smug, judgmental expression on his face. My mother, Susan, carried her designer handbag in the crook of her arm, her chin tilted upward, acting as if she owned the very marble floor she was walking on. I watched the live feed as Brandon confidently approached the main security and reception desk. He did not wait in the brief line. He bypassed two people and slapped his hand flat on the polished granite counter. "I am Brandon," he announced loudly, his voice echoing through the cavernous lobby. "I am the chief executive officer of my firm, and I am here for a highly confidential Tier 1 settlement meeting with the Executive Ownership Board. They are expecting me." The receptionist, a brilliant young woman named Sarah, whom I had personally briefed earlier that morning, did not bat an eye at his terrible manners. She offered him a warm, highly professional smile. "Of course," Sir Sarah replied smoothly. "The executive board is very eager to meet with you. Please allow our security personnel to escort your party directly to the penthouse boardroom. Can I offer you or your guests any premium coffee or sparkling water before you head up?" Brandon smirked, looking back at my parents as if he had just conquered a small country. "Sparkling water for all of us," he demanded. "And make sure it is waiting on the table when we get there. We have a lot of expensive ground to cover today." Sarah nodded gracefully and gestured toward two burly security guards who stepped forward to lead them toward the private elevators. I watched the camera feed switch from the lobby to the interior of the elevator car. The moment the steel doors closed, the facade of professional composure vanished, and their greedy excitement completely took over. "Can you believe this place?" Jasmine squealed, lowering her phone for a second to look at the mahogany-paneled walls of the elevator. "They are totally terrified of us, Brandon. I told you my video would destroy them. We are definitely getting the Lake Como villa for the wedding. I am going to make sure they comp the first-class flights for my entire bridal party, too." Brandon adjusted his rented tie, puffing out his chest. "Just follow my lead," he instructed his fiancée. "These old corporate board members are terrified of bad publicity. When we walk into that room, I am going to take total control of the narrative. Do not accept their first offer. I am going to squeeze them for every single dollar they have. And before we sign any settlement papers, I am demanding physical proof that Natalie has been permanently fired and escorted off the premises." My mother reached over and affectionately patted Brandon's shoulder. "I am so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart," she cooed. "You are handling this like a true titan of industry. It is a shame your sister had to let her petty jealousy ruin her own career, but she made her bed. It is time she learned that there are severe consequences for crossing you." The elevator chimed, and the feed switched to the hallway camera outside the main boardroom. The heavy double doors were already propped open, revealing the massive, sleek interior. The Apex corporate boardroom was intentionally designed to be highly intimidating. It featured a 30-foot-long table carved from a single slab of dark polished walnut. The walls were constructed of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying panoramic view of the city skyline. Black leather chairs lined the perimeter. The family walked into the room, their footsteps muffled by the thick, expensive carpeting. They looked around, momentarily silenced by the sheer scale and wealth of the space, but their arrogance quickly rebounded. Brandon walked directly toward the center of the long table, pulling out one of the heavy leather chairs and sitting down with a loud sigh of satisfaction. He placed his empty leather briefcase flat on the walnut surface. He did not sit at the head of the table. He intentionally left the seat at the very front of the room empty, clearly assuming that the ancient, terrifying chairman of the board would be sitting there. Jasmine immediately walked over to the glass wall, posing against the dramatic backdrop of the city below, taking rapid-fire selfies to document her absolute victory. My father took a seat next to Brandon, nodding approvingly at the bottles of imported sparkling water waiting on silver coasters. "We have them right where we want them," my father said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Remember, Brandon, do not let these corporate lawyers intimidate you with their legal jargon. You hold all the leverage here. They need you to make this public relations disaster disappear." I stood in the surveillance room watching them celebrate their imaginary triumph. They were sitting in my chairs. They were drinking my water. They were actively plotting to destroy my livelihood, completely convinced that they had outsmarted a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I looked at the digital clock on the wall. It flashed exactly 10 o'clock. I turned away from the glowing monitors and looked at Jonathan and David. They were both standing silently, holding thick leather folders containing the forged corporate guarantee, the itemized invoice for the ruined party, and the extensive logs of Jasmine's defamatory digital footprint. "It is time," I said softly, feeling a cold electric thrill travel down my spine. Jonathan opened the connecting door that led directly from the surveillance room into the short hallway right outside the main boardroom. I stepped through first, my stiletto heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I did not feel an ounce of fear. I did not feel any lingering childhood guilt. I only felt the pure, undeniable weight of absolute authority. I walked straight toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom, ready to let their spectacular house of cards collapse directly onto their heads. I placed my hands flat against the heavy brass handles of the boardroom doors and pushed them open. They swung inward with a smooth, silent glide. I stepped across the threshold, my stiletto heels sinking slightly into the plush carpet before finding the hardwood border, producing a sharp, rhythmic click with every single step. Jonathan and David followed closely behind me, carrying the thick leather folders, their faces entirely devoid of emotion. The atmosphere inside the room shifted instantly. Brandon was in the middle of a sentence, leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head, bragging to our father about his brilliant negotiation tactics. His voice trailed off into a confused stammer the second he saw me. Jasmine lowered her phone, her forced influencer smile dropping into a deep, irritated scowl. My parents both sat up perfectly straight, their eyes darting between me and the two men walking behind me. They were expecting a panel of elderly, intimidated investors. They were expecting a team of nervous corporate lawyers, ready to hand over a massive settlement check to make a public relations nightmare disappear. Instead, they got the daughter they had banished to the loading dock. I did not say a word. I did not look at them with anger. I simply maintained my calm, authoritative stride, walking the entire 30-foot length of the mahogany table. I bypassed the empty side chairs. I bypassed Brandon, who was staring at me with a mixture of annoyance and dawning confusion. I walked straight to the absolute head of the table, pulled out the heavy, high-backed leather executive chair that Brandon had intentionally left empty for the chairman of the board, and I sat down. Jonathan took the seat immediately to my right. David stood at absolute attention just behind my left shoulder. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. I folded my hands on the polished walnut surface and looked directly down the table at my brother. My mother was the first to break the tension. She let out a sharp, cruel laugh, completely misinterpreting the entire situation. She genuinely believed she was witnessing the final act of my corporate destruction. "Well," my mother said, her voice dripping with extreme vindictive satisfaction, "I suppose the executive board forced you to come down here and face us directly. I told you this would happen, Natalie. I told you that your petty jealousy would completely ruin your career. The ownership board clearly brought you into this room to formally terminate your employment in front of us as part of Brandon's settlement demands. You should have just stayed in your car like your brother told you to. Now look at you." Brandon smirked, his arrogant confidence returning instantly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, completely ignoring Jonathan and David. "I hope you brought a cardboard box for your desk supplies," Brandon sneered. "Because I specifically demanded that your termination be finalized before I sign any paperwork to call off my lawsuit. You messed with the wrong visionary, Natalie. You played a stupid game and now you are fired." Jasmine actually raised her phone again, pointing the camera directly at me, clearly preparing to secretly record my highly anticipated firing for her followers. "This is exactly what you deserve," she chimed in, glaring at me through her phone screen. "You ruined my wedding aesthetic, so we are taking your job." I let them speak. I let them put every single ounce of their hateful, delusional entitlement out into the open air of the boardroom. I wanted their arrogance to peak right before I completely shattered it. I did not defend myself. I did not argue. I simply looked up at David and gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. David stepped forward. He reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek silver card holder. He walked down the right side of the massive table, stopping directly behind my father. With smooth, practiced elegance, David pulled out a single thick, matte black business card and placed it face up on the walnut table right in front of him. He continued around the table. He placed a card in front of my mother. He placed a card in front of Jasmine. And finally, he stopped right beside Brandon, dropping the heavy black card directly next to his completely empty leather briefcase. Then David stepped back and cleared his throat, his voice projecting clearly across the massive room. To clear up any immediate confusion regarding the organizational hierarchy of this meeting, David announced, his tone perfectly professional and entirely devastating. "I would like to formally introduce you to the individual you have been demanding to speak with. You are not meeting with a panel of anonymous investors today. You are meeting directly with the founder, chief executive officer, and 90% majority shareholder of Apex Hospitality Group." My father was the first one to look down at the card. I watched his eyes scan the embossed silver lettering. I watched his jaw physically drop open. He blinked rapidly, leaning closer to the table as if his eyes were deceiving him. My mother picked the card up with trembling fingers. She read it silently. The vindictive, cruel smile that had been plastered across her face just moments ago completely vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute, unadulterated horror. She looked from the card to me, her breath catching in her throat. But it was Brandon's reaction that was the absolute masterpiece. He stared at the black card resting on the table. The words were printed in bold, undeniable silver font. Natalie, founder and chief executive officer, Apex Hospitality Group. The blood drained out of his face so fast he actually looked sickly. His chest stopped moving. He stared at the card, and then he slowly raised his head to look at me sitting at the head of the table. The smug, visionary venture capitalist act completely evaporated in a single second. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He had not cornered a massive corporation. He had not outsmarted a board of elderly billionaires. He had walked right into a trap, set by the sister he had treated like absolute garbage for 34 years. The silence that fell over the boardroom this time was deafening. It was not a tense silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a spectacular house of cards, completely collapsing inward. Jasmine slowly lowered her phone, her hand visibly shaking, finally understanding that she was not recording my firing. She was sitting in the private domain of the woman she had just publicly slandered to nearly 1 million people. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table, breaking the silence with a voice that was calm, steady, and completely devoid of mercy. "Welcome to my building, Brandon," I said. "I hear you have some demands for the ownership board." Brandon tried to speak, but his vocal cords seemed completely paralyzed. He opened and closed his mouth like a suffocating fish, his eyes darting wildly around the massive boardroom as if looking for an emergency exit. Finally, he managed to push out a weak, breathy sound. "Natalie," he stammered, his voice cracking. "There has been a massive misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, tasting the absolute pathetic nature of his excuse. Is that what you call demanding my termination and a free $300,000 Italian wedding? Because from where I am sitting, it looked like a highly calculated extortion attempt. I did not give him another second to formulate a lie. I held out my right hand without looking away from him. Jonathan immediately placed a thick manila folder into my palm. I opened it, pulled out a crisp color printed document, and tossed it so it slid directly down the center of the polished walnut table. It came to a stop right in front of Brandon's empty leather briefcase. "Take a good look at that, Brandon," I commanded, my voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. "That is the corporate guarantee form you submitted to my accounting department 3 weeks ago. The one you claimed was authorized by your imaginary venture capital firm." Brandon looked down at the paper, his chest heaving rapidly. He did not reach out to touch it. He treated it like it was coated in poison. "You will notice the signature at the bottom," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly analytical and relentless. "It spells out my name. But as we both know, I never signed that piece of paper. You downloaded a standard vendor template from our public website, forged my signature, and used it to secure a $150,000 line of credit. You stole from my company to pay for your luxury penthouse suite, your imported caviar, and the 4-carat platinum diamond ring currently sitting on your fiancé's left hand." Jasmine gasped loudly. Her hands instinctively flew to cover the massive ring on her finger, as if it had suddenly caught fire. She looked at Brandon, her eyes wide with absolute terror. "Brandon, what is she talking about?" Jasmine demanded, her voice shrill. "You told me you bought this ring with cash from your investment dividends. You said you were a millionaire." Brandon completely ignored her. His eyes locked in sheer panic on the forged signature. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. "Natalie, please listen to me," he pleaded, dropping the corporate litigator act entirely. "We are family. I was going to pay the company back. I just needed to project a certain high society image to get my real firm off the ground. You understand business. You understand leveraging assets. It was just a temporary loan to build my brand. It was not a loan," I stated coldly, slicing through his pathetic justifications. "It was felony theft. And I am not speaking to you right now as your sister. I am speaking to you as the chief executive officer of the corporation you just actively defrauded." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, making sure he felt the full crushing weight of reality. In this state, corporate fraud and identity theft resulting in damages over $100,000 is not a simple misunderstanding, I explained, delivering the facts with brutal precision. It is a Class B felony. Do you have any idea what the mandatory sentencing guidelines are for a Class B felony, Brandon? It carries a penalty of 5 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. That means if I hand this single piece of paper over to the district attorney right now, you will not be attending a luxury destination wedding in Lake Como. You will be spending the next decade of your life in a concrete cell wearing a jumpsuit that definitely does not fit your carefully curated aesthetic. My mother jumped out of her chair. The heavy leather seat scraped loudly against the thick carpet. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her maternal instinct finally kicking in, entirely directed at protecting her golden boy from the consequences of his own actions. "You cannot send your own brother to prison. It is just money, Natalie. You are clearly incredibly wealthy. You own this entire skyscraper. You can easily afford to just write this off as a minor business expense." I turned my icy glare directly toward her. "I did not get to the top of this building by subsidizing criminals, Mother," I said, my voice dropping into a register of pure, uncompromising authority. "And I highly suggest you sit down and remain completely silent. Because less than 24 hours ago, you stood in my living room and actively tried to extort me for my personal retirement funds to cover up his crime. You threatened to disown me if I did not pay for his mess." My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off immediately. "I have that entire living room conversation recorded on my phone in high-definition audio," I reminded her. If you continue to defend him in my boardroom, I will gladly hand that audio file over to the federal prosecutors and have you formally charged as an accessory after the fact for attempting to conceal a major corporate fraud. My father, who had been sitting in stunned, open-mouthed silence since the business cards were handed out, suddenly grabbed my mother's arm. He violently yanked her back down into her seat. "Shut up, Susan," he hissed at her, his face pale with genuine terror. "Just shut up before she puts us all in jail." For the very first time in his life, my father realized he could not bully his way out of a situation. He realized I held the absolute power to destroy them all, and that I was no longer the compliant, terrified girl living in their flooded basement. I returned my focus to Brandon. He was visibly shaking now. He looked incredibly small, sitting in the oversized executive chair. The arrogant, untouchable golden child was entirely gone. "But the forged document is only the beginning of your problems," I said, holding out my hand to Jonathan without breaking eye contact with my brother. "Because you are not the only one in this room who decided to play stupid games with my company." I shifted my gaze away from Brandon and looked directly down the table at Jasmine. She instantly shrank back into her chair, realizing she was no longer a spectator. It was her turn. Jasmine pressed her back hard against the leather chair, her eyes wide and terrified as my gaze locked onto her. She had spent the last 24 hours playing the victim for her massive online audience, confidently spewing venom and lies, completely secure in the belief that she was untouchable. Now, sitting in the very corporate boardroom she had boldly marched into just 10 minutes ago, the reality of her situation was finally crashing down. I held out my hand once more. Jonathan immediately placed a second, significantly thicker folder into my palm. I did not toss this one. I slid it smoothly down the polished walnut surface. It glided past my father and came to a sudden stop right in front of Jasmine's bright red cocktail dress. "Go ahead and open it, Jasmine," I instructed, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. She shook her head rapidly, refusing to even touch the heavy manila cover. Her breathing was quick and shallow. When it became clear she was too paralyzed to open the file, I decided to summarize the contents for her. Inside that folder is a comprehensive, highly detailed digital footprint of the smear campaign you launched against my company yesterday afternoon, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, but entirely lethal. "My legal and public relations teams have been working through the night. We have captured the IP logs, the exact timestamps, and high-resolution downloads of every single video post and comment you made regarding the Grand Atrium Hotel. We also have certified transcripts of the live streams where you explicitly accused this corporation of discriminatory business practices, extortion, and emotional abuse." Jasmine swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. "I was just upset," she whispered, her voice trembling so badly I could barely hear her. "I was just telling my truth. You were telling a highly fabricated, malicious lie to hundreds of thousands of people." I corrected her sharply. "You intentionally incited a digital mob to attack my business. But worst of all, Jasmine, you looked directly into the camera and explicitly named me. You told your followers that a bitter low-level employee named Natalie orchestrated the entire disaster out of pure spite. You actively weaponized your platform to try and destroy my career." I leaned back in my heavy executive chair, interlacing my fingers. "In the corporate legal world, we call that defamation per se. And unlike your imaginary aesthetic, the legal consequences are incredibly real. My legal team has already begun calculating the financial damages your little internet stunt caused." I continued, letting the weight of the impending lawsuit hang heavy in the air. "We are tracking the canceled reservations, the negative reviews, and the overall damage to the Apex Hospitality brand. I am not going to sue you for an apology. I am going to file a civil liability lawsuit against you for millions of dollars. Your influencer sponsors did not drop you just because you looked broke yesterday. They dropped you because you are now a massive radioactive legal liability. You just publicly slandered a billionaire corporate entity, and we have every single piece of evidence required to completely bankrupt you for the rest of your natural life." Genuine ugly tears began to stream down Jasmine's face. This was not the pretty calculated crying she used for her social media videos. This was the raw, hyperventilating panic of a woman who just realized she had completely destroyed her own future. She turned frantically toward Brandon, grabbing his arm. "Brandon, do something," she sobbed, digging her manicured nails into his rented suit jacket. "Tell her we did not mean it. Tell her we will delete the videos. I cannot be sued. I do not have that kind of money." Brandon did not look at her. He just stared blankly at the forged corporate guarantee sitting in front of him, entirely broken and completely useless to her. Jasmine turned her desperate, tear-stained face back toward me. "Natalie, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I did not know you owned the company. Brandon told me you were just an office manager. If I had known you were the CEO, I never would have posted those things. I swear to you." I felt a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. "I want you to listen to what you just said, Jasmine. You are not apologizing because you lied. You are apologizing because you found out I have more power than you. You thought it was perfectly fine to slander and destroy a mid-level employee. You thought you could step on the little guy to build your brand. The law does not care if you thought I was a receptionist or the majority shareholder. Slander is slander." I turned my attention away from her sobbing and looked over my shoulder at David. David stepped forward for the final time. He held a single crisp white sheet of paper in his hands. He walked purposefully down the length of the table and placed it exactly in the center, perfectly positioned between Brandon and my father. "That is the final piece of business we need to conclude today," I announced, my voice slicing through Jasmine's frantic crying. "Because the $150,000 corporate credit line you attempted to use was entirely fraudulent, the venue contract for the Grand Atrium is completely void. However, you still consumed goods and services before I initiated the shutdown." I pointed at the crisp white paper. "That is the itemized invoice for the actual costs incurred by your fake billionaire party. It covers the premium imported caviar your guests ate. It covers the vintage champagne they drank. It covers the hazard pay and overtime for the banquet staff who had to clean up the massive mess you left behind. And it covers the cost of that ridiculous custom ice sculpture you demanded." My father slowly reached out a trembling hand and pulled the invoice closer. He stared at the bold number printed at the very bottom of the page. "The total is exactly $48,000, I stated clearly, making sure the number echoed in the boardroom. "You walked into my building this morning demanding a $300,000 luxury wedding in Italy. You expected to leave this room with a massive settlement check and my termination papers. Instead, you are leaving with a multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuit, a Class B felony forgery charge hanging directly over your head, and an immediate legally binding debt of $48,000. I looked at the four of them, taking in the absolute devastation etched onto their faces. The arrogant, entitled family that had marched into the lobby just 20 minutes ago was completely gone. They were thoroughly and completely cornered. They had built a spectacular house of cards using my money and my resources, and I had just gleefully pulled out the bottom row. The boardroom was dead silent except for the sound of Jasmine's ragged, panicked breathing. They had absolutely nowhere to run and nobody to blame but themselves. Brandon shattered the silence first. The realization that he was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment completely broke him. He did not apologize. He did not take an ounce of accountability. Instead, he turned his desperate, panicked eyes entirely onto the woman sitting next to him. "It was her fault," Brandon blurted out, pointing a trembling finger directly at Jasmine's face. "She is the one who demanded the Grand Atrium. She is the one who said her engagement ring had to be at least 4 carats, or she would not marry me. You know I do not care about vintage champagne, Natalie. Jasmine said she needed the absolute perfect high society aesthetic for her followers. She pressured me into this. I had to secure the venue to keep her happy. She made me do it." Jasmine whipped her head around so fast I thought her neck might snap. Her tear-stained face twisted into an expression of absolute unhinged fury. She looked at the man she was supposed to marry, finally seeing him not as a wealthy venture capitalist, but as a pathetic broke fraud who was actively trying to hand her to the authorities to save his own skin. "You lied to me!" Jasmine screamed, her voice cracking violently as she stood up from her heavy leather chair. "You told me you managed a $50 million portfolio. You told me you owned a penthouse. You let me go on the internet and brag to my entire audience about how incredibly successful my billionaire fiancé was. And you are actually just a broke, unemployed loser who lives off credit cards and steals from his own sister." Brandon reached out desperately, trying to grab her hand. "Baby, please," he begged, his voice high and whining. "We can fix this. My firm is just in a transitional phase right now. Once I get my seed funding, I will pay everything back. Do not touch me!" Jasmine shrieked violently, slapping his hand away. "There is no seed funding, Brandon. There is no firm. You are facing 10 years in federal prison. You are a complete scam artist. You absolutely ruined my life. My sponsors are gone. My reputation is destroyed. I am going to be a laughingstock for the rest of my life because I tied my brand to a massive broke felony suspect." She reached down and aggressively grabbed the 4-carat platinum diamond ring sitting on her left hand. She yanked it off her finger with so much force that it left a bright red mark on her skin. "Keep your stolen ring," she screamed. Jasmine threw the heavy piece of jewelry directly at his face. The diamond struck Brandon's cheekbone with a sharp thud before clattering loudly onto the polished walnut table, spinning wildly before coming to a stop right next to the forged corporate guarantee. Jasmine did not look back. She grabbed her designer purse, turned on her stiletto heels, and ran, practically sprinting toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom. She threw them open and disappeared into the hallway, her frantic sobs echoing down the corridor until the elevator doors finally swallowed the sound. The heavy boardroom doors slowly swung shut, sealing my family inside the room with the absolute wreckage of their golden child. Brandon sat slumped in his chair, rubbing his red cheek where the diamond had struck him, staring blankly at the wall. With the influencer audience officially gone, the entire dynamic of the room instantly shifted. The aggressive, demanding posture my parents had maintained since they walked into the lobby completely vanished. The reality of the $48,000 invoice and the looming criminal charges finally broke through their lifelong delusion. My mother burst into violent, desperate tears. It was not her usual manipulative crying designed to get her way. This was the terrified weeping of a woman who was watching her entire world burn to the ground. She stood up from her chair, her knees visibly trembling, and walked slowly toward the head of the table where I was sitting. "Natalie, please," my mother begged, her voice thick and choked with emotion. She reached out, placing her hands flat on the mahogany table as if she was praying to me. "You have made your point. You won. You showed us all how incredibly powerful and successful you are. But please look at your brother. He is completely destroyed. The wedding is canceled. His fiancée just left him. He has nothing. You cannot send him to prison." My father nodded rapidly, jumping in to support her, completely abandoning the aggressive tone he had used to threaten me in my apartment. "We are family." "Natalie," he pleaded, leaning forward with his hands clasped tightly together. "Family protects family. Brandon just made a stupid, foolish mistake. He was under so much pressure to impress that girl. He got in over his head. You know he is a good boy deep down. Please, you have to drop these charges. We will do whatever you want. Just tell us how to make this right." I looked at the two of them. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no residual urge to comfort them. The emotional well I had drawn from for 34 years was entirely dry. "A stupid mistake," I repeated, my voice dropping into a cold, flat monotone that made my mother flinch. "Forgetting to pay a parking ticket is a stupid mistake, Dad. Planning a multi-month fraud, downloading a corporate document, forging a signature, lying to the venue staff, and stealing $150,000 is not a mistake. It is a highly calculated criminal enterprise." I stood up slowly from my executive chair. I looked down at my parents, making sure they understood that the door to my forgiveness was permanently bolted shut. Do not dare stand in my boardroom and play the family card, I told them, my words slicing through my mother's sobbing. Family does not drag their daughter out to a dirty loading dock because she ruins their aesthetic. Family does not stand in my living room and demand I drain my retirement account to pay for a destination wedding in Italy. Yesterday you looked me in the eye and told me I was dead to you if I did not hand over my money. You told me I was entirely alone in this world. But you are our daughter. My mother cried, tears ruining her expensive makeup. No, I corrected her sharply. I have never been your daughter. I have only ever been Brandon's human shield. You took my college fund to pay for his failed startup. You put me in a freezing flooded basement so you could afford his downtown loft. You spent my entire life pushing me into the dirt so he could stand a little taller. And even now, after he committed a massive federal crime against my company, your only instinct is to beg me to lay down on the tracks to save him. I pointed at the itemized invoice sitting in the center of the table. The era of me paying for his life is officially over, I announced. I am not dropping the fraud charges, and I am not absorbing the cost of his party. You wanted a golden child and you got one. Now you get to pay for him. My father stared at me, his face turning an ashen, sickly gray. The concept of personal sacrifice had never applied to him before. He had always eagerly sacrificed my resources, my college fund, and my comfort to keep his perfect son afloat. Now the bill had finally arrived at his own doorstep, and the sheer terror of having to pay it with his own money was entirely paralyzing. I stood up slowly from the heavy executive chair, smoothing the front of my black blazer. I reached across the polished walnut table and picked up the forged corporate guarantee. I did not hand it back to Brandon. Instead, I slid it directly over to Jonathan, who calmly placed it inside his leather briefcase and clicked the brass locks shut. The sharp metallic sound echoed like a judge striking a gavel. Here are your options, I said, looking down at the three people who used to be my family. I am giving you a remarkably generous grace period. You have until exactly 5 o'clock this coming Friday afternoon to wire $48,000 into the Apex Hospitality corporate accounts to cover the damages from last night. My mother let out a loud, breathless gasp. We do not have that kind of liquid cash sitting around, she cried, wiping her ruined mascara with the back of her trembling hand. You know your father just retired. You know we are on a fixed income. How are we supposed to come up with that much money in 4 days? I suggest you do exactly what you demanded I do yesterday morning, I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. You can call your financial provider and liquidate your own retirement funds. You can drive to the bank and take out a second mortgage on your house. You can sell your luxury cars. You can pawn your jewelry. I really do not care how you get the money. But if that wire transfer does not clear by Friday at 5 o'clock, Jonathan has my strict, irrevocable authorization to walk directly into the district attorney's office and hand over the felony forgery evidence. Brandon let out a low, pathetic whimper, burying his face in his hands. He was completely defeated. He knew there was no talking his way out of this. My father looked at Brandon, then looked at me, his shoulders slumping in absolute defeat. You are really going to do this? He asked, his voice hollow and completely drained of its usual arrogance. You are going to bankrupt your own parents to punish your brother. I am not bankrupting anyone, I corrected him sharply. I am simply enforcing the law and collecting a legitimate corporate debt. You are the ones choosing to bankrupt yourselves to keep your golden child out of a federal penitentiary. It is a choice, Dad. You are entirely free to keep your retirement money and let Brandon face the legal consequences of his own actions. The decision is completely yours. I turned away from them, picking up my purse from the table. I looked at David, who was standing tall, a look of profound respect on his face. David, I said, keeping my tone strictly professional, please have security escort these 3 individuals out of the building. Ensure they do not take any unauthorized detours on their way to the lobby, and permanently revoke their access to any Apex Hospitality property worldwide. Yes, Boss David replied immediately, stepping toward the door to summon the guards. I did not wait for the security team to arrive. I did not want to spend another second breathing the same air as them. I picked up my belongings and walked toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom. Natalie, wait. My mother wailed, scrambling out of her chair and taking a desperate step toward me. Please do not walk away from us. We can go to family counseling. We can fix this. We are your family. I did not stop walking. I did not turn my head. I pushed open the boardroom doors and stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind me with a solid, satisfying click, completely cutting off the sound of my mother's frantic sobbing and my father's heavy, defeated sighs. I walked to the private executive elevator, pressed the button, and rode it all the way down to the ground floor. When I stepped out of the towering glass skyscraper and onto the bustling downtown sidewalk, the late morning sun hit my face. The city around me was loud, vibrant, and moving at a frantic pace. Horns were blaring, people were rushing to meetings with coffee cups in hand, and the world was completely indifferent to the massive familial collapse that had just occurred 70 stories above. I took a deep breath of the crisp city air. For the first time in 34 years, the crushing invisible weight of obligation and guilt was completely gone from my shoulders. The toxic dynamic that had tethered me to their endless demands had been severed with a single brutal strike. I had spent my entire life believing that success was about proving them wrong. I thought building a multi-million-dollar empire would finally earn me a seat at their table. But standing on the sidewalk today, I realized the absolute truth. True wealth is not measured by the balance in your corporate accounts or the title on your business card. True wealth is the absolute, unshakable freedom to finally cut the dead weight from your life and never look back. I did not need a seat at their table because I owned the entire building. Have you ever had to bankrupt a toxic family member to save your own peace? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.